Thanks. All right.
All right. Am I starting? Should I
You're doing
jump
it.
right
You're
in?
starting.
Okay.
Yes,
All
jump
right.
right in.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm just really excited to share and learn from our other panelists and the questions that everyone has. I'm calling in from St. Paul, Minnesota, which is the traditional homelands and waters of the Dakota people. I'm in Dakota Oyate, which is the ancestral land of the Oceti Sakowin. It's really a real honor to be here to share a little bit about my work. I'm an environmental social scientist, so I come at this from really wanting to understand how people connect and relate to the natural environment. And my research has focused on environmental justice work as well as really centering community in that work. Over the past decade or so, I've had the fortune to be able to work with several Ojibwe and Anishinaabe tribes in Minnesota, the state of Wisconsin, and Michigan. And our focus has really been on protecting tribal sovereignty and treaty rights in Minnesota and in the Western Great Lakes region that enables tribal nation members and also tribal community members to practice their treaty rights. My focus has been on cultural ecosystem relationships. So when I think about planetary health, I think a lot about sort of the ways in which people relate to and depend on the natural world. And my research tends to kind of focus on um, kind of understanding different approaches to being able to uplift those narratives and relationships. Um, yeah, and I get really excited in thinking about sort of how we can bring people back to those tight relationships with the planet. And really, you know, what the planet has to offer us all in its healthy natural state, thinking about soils, water, plants, animals, and people. Um, so that's kind of when I think about research, I think about it from a social science perspective, but really understanding those relationships that people have with the natural environment. And I've been so inspired and actually have found so much optimism in the projects I've had and the relationships that I've developed with Indigenous partners in Minnesota and around the Western Great Lakes.
Thank you for that, May.
Yeah.
And then we'll pass to Kira.
Hi, everyone. So grateful to be here today. I am joining from the traditional territories of the Coquitlam First Nation in what is currently known as Port Coquitlam in southern British Columbia, Canada, and joining from a very, very rainy day here. We have an atmospheric river coming through, which always is a good reminder to me when we have these sorts of big weather events or of just how much we are embedded in and connected to our environments and how we are very interdependent on a safe and healthy earth system for our own well-being. And to think about that question of what planetary health research means to me. I agree with May that a lot of this is about relationships. And I think particularly attending to relationships that are between human health, human equity, human well-being, and then the health of our natural systems, including earth systems, including planetary boundaries science, and also perhaps not always, but often using systems thinking, particularly social ecological systems thinking. And I think also, not always, but I think planetary health research could aim to also envision humans as more of a part of nature rather than separate from. And I also agree with Mae. It's a lot about uplifting traditional and indigenous ways of knowing and being that have done this kind of thinking for time immemorial. So thank you. Such a good question. It really had me thinking for a while today on what does planetary health research really mean. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Kira. Patricia, would you want to go next?
Yes, and thank you for having me today. I'm now in Minneapolis, and we had like a snowy blizzard. So yesterday was sunny today. So
A very
yes,
snowy blizzard, like 3 feet of snow in the backyard right now.
but
So
now it's super sunny, so you can literally feel the change. I'm going to actually agree with both May and Kira and say like, so for me, it's as Angelica mentioned, I'm working on exposomics, so it means whatever you are exposed to is going to change you. And there are those relations and the system thinking that is super important for you. So you need your internal exposome, you need your external exposome, and these are actually like three parts. The internal exposome is the omics part, the external exposome is the environmental exposures and the built-in environment, which is like the socioeconomy, the societal determinants. And all of these are working together in order to reach that planetary health that we are thinking about. And having these relations and knowing all of this is important. And that's also kind of how the biosensing comes into place, because we need to measure these relations and to know better about how each of them are affecting each other. And so this is the important part for me. So either you are putting the human in the center and you're looking on how all of these exposures or the internal exposures over time and over generations is affecting the health of the human. You have to know like what are the combination and how they have like the additive effect, or they are going to actually be a protective and reduce the risk of the person for the disease. Or you can actually say the same thing when you are looking at the health of like, or the quality of like the soil, water, and air. So it's kind of like the combination of all of these relations and how they are impacting each other that are going to end up with the planetary health and how we are going to have like everything in a healthy and good quality for everyone living in that planet, not only like the humans.
Yeah, thank you for that, Patricia. Kate, would you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. What a tough act to follow. Goodness, I'm learning so much already. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I feel like I'm in the right place. So at this moment, I'm fairly new. I used to live on the east coast of Canada in Mi'kmaq territory. I now live in the on the land of the people of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, Onondaga, and Anishinaabe. And actually, today we're on the shores of Lake Huron, Georgian Bay. We have a boil water advisory. It's strange weather moment here. So I come to planetary health, I think, from a long career. You can tell by my hair color in 30 years of caring a lot and thinking with and alongside children and young people, and working for a generational justice that they need and deserve to live well. So I've had the distinct privilege of working in the south of Chile with the Mapuche Huichi youth and communities, and it was there that I learned what it is to live and walk, what here we would call planetary health, they would not. And that's been the profound learning really of my life and my career. And I can get to continue that work working with Maroon young people in Jamaica, with Mayan young people in Belize, and with the Brunca people in Costa Rica, always young people in relation to their communities on their land and territory. And the question we like to talk about at length is how to live well now. And when we do that, with my great fortune to do that with young people, I learn a lot of things about how we live well now. And it kind of looks like, what planetary health is and is becoming in the sort of Western techno-scientific notion of planetary health. So that's really what I do. The research is to keep young people at the core, to have them lead the research in ways that I and my team can support them in doing. And they then go out and speak to their elders and their peers and others about how to live well now, both with climate and ecological disruption and tech. So we're always sort of at the nexus of what it's like to be young and meet the challenging moment of those two things in partnership together as they come down and make the world of young people.
Thank you for that, Kate, and for the work that you've done with young people. Yeah, there's a lot of correlation already happening in the relationship piece being such the foundation, right, of planetary health, and maybe what's drawn any of us into this work, no matter the terminology or definitions that we've used over the course of time. And I'm so interested to learn more about how we can, all of us, right, can return to seeing the world through more youthful eyes, and fostering that curiosity and wonder and love for the earth and its many beings. Heather, I will pass things to you for the next question.
Sure, yeah. It just got me smiling about the importance of play. And as adults, I think it's really hard for us to remember how to play sometimes. And I think in play, that's where imagination and creativity come along, and how to be in better relation with the world around us for sure. So this is the fun question in my mind because it's you get to talk about your research now, and what academic doesn't like to talk about their research? So pick your favorite project that engages in some way or another with planetary health. And Kate, I think you were kind of going in that direction already. But yeah, I really just want people to have a chance to share and celebrate the work that you're doing. And I might even ask some questions if you keep it too short. I'll be like, well, what about this? What about that? So just be prepared. I might pick up on that a little bit. And I thought maybe we could start with you, Kira. And I'm a happy research participant of the project that you're involved in. So I can break my own code of confidentiality there. And so therefore you can feel free to talk about whatever it is that I said in our interview. I'll leave it to you to just, share a little bit about your research. And then in terms of order, we'll go Kira, Pat, Kate, and then Mae. Okay, go for it, Kira.
Thanks so much, Heather. Yes, so I came to planetary health. The first article I ever read about planetary health was actually Nicole Redver's article about Indigenous natural and first law in planetary health. And I just thought, this is the kind of space I want to be working in. And so I started reading a lot about planetary health, and at the beginning of my PhD, and I started finding things like the Safeguarding Human Health in the Anthropocene, the Whitney article, saying how our current systems of governance are not really fit for purpose for where we're at, and if we want to achieve planetary health, we're going to need to do better. And then I started finding these just sporadic and occasional mentions of, we need better planetary health governance, or we need governance for planetary health. And I thought, well, what does this mean? And every question that I asked of those pieces of literature was not really answered by the literature. So I felt like there was this sort of beginnings of engagement with this idea of planetary health governance or governance for planetary health, but nobody was really describing what that meant. And so as a PhD student, I thought, this is great. This is a gap in the literature. I can spend some time here, and it's been a really fantastic experience thus far. I decided to start just looking to the literature, and I'm going to hopefully have my first draft of my publication done by the end of this week, exploring planetary health and governance in a scoping review. And so that's coming along well. I'll be very happy to share that with this group in the coming months, hopefully. And then the second part of my research, I thought I would talk to people, especially the people who've been writing about these terms, who've been working in this space. And so I have been doing interviews for the last few months. My last interview is scheduled for the middle of April, so I still have a little bit of time in case anyone feels like they might have something to say about this that they would like to share. I welcome you to reach out to me. So I've been doing interviews with people working in planetary health primarily, but also some people who are working in government or other governance studies, and talking to them about what this means and what kinds of concepts and ideas are essential to planetary health governance process, to think about opportunities and barriers to achieving such a thing. And the third part of my research is going to be a case study. So I'm still developing that, so I can't share too much of the details on it. But I'm going to be working with some local projects that are explicitly implementing planetary health, and to learn from what it means to do this in practice. What does it mean to take planetary health and put it into some sort of institution as a framework for advancing planetary health priorities and changing behaviors within institutions? So yes, and so that's my planetary health research in a nutshell. I'm really happy to answer any questions, and I know I'll get an opportunity to elaborate a little bit more. So I think I'll stop there for the moment.
Sure. Thanks, Kira. I will ask one sort of clarifying question is, do you have a working definition of your own about what planetary health governance is?
Wow. That's a big question. No, I would say not in this moment. I get closer and closer to having one, I feel like, but I am just starting the analysis of my interviews as I'm finishing them up, and I wouldn't want to speak to that without being able to really include what I'm learning from everyone that I've been talking to. I will also add that as part of my interviews, I've been really working to get as global of a perspective as I can. So I've talked to people on 6 continents, and really tried to keep balanced perspectives from people all over the world who are working in the planetary health space. So I'll just also add that.
Sure. Do you have any sort of preliminary observations about what you're finding? Any emerging potential themes?
Yes, definitely. I will say that the idea of humans being interconnected with nature is definitely something that's come up a lot. I will say equity and justice have been very, very big as something that has to be centered. And I think more broadly, the idea of integrative approaches, collaborative approaches, working across sectors, working in intergovernmental and intersectoral and interinstitutional ways are definitely things that are coming out as key themes.
All right. One last thing before I move to the next speaker, and that is there anything new or surprising, something that you did not expect to hear that you were like, whoa, that's a completely new insight that I hadn't heard from other participants?
That's a really good question. I'm not so sure that I have anything that comes to mind immediately in the surprising realm. I think I also have tried to be very open in like what I've been keeping my expectations of what I want to hear is like just as broad as possible. So that may add to my lack of surprise. I think, yeah, I think that's. I'll have to think a little bit more about it, and I'll get back to you if something comes to mind.
Okay, that sounds great, Kira. Thank you so much.
I
If
have
we have
one
time,
question before you
oh
proceed.
yeah, go
For
for it.
Kira, follow up. I'm just curious in your quest and all of it, interviewing and inclusion of global voices, how you are navigating, or if you're navigating, how you include the voice of the natural world and multi-species beyond the human voice, and what has that looked like?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I think an important one that is, I hope that people that are working in this space often are thinking about more than human others. However, many people who are working in the space are often, taking positions that are embodying knowledge from, well, a lot of different worldviews, but thinking about things in relationship to governance. So sometimes there are fewer people who are involved in perhaps spaces where people might actually feel comfortable speaking on behalf of others. This is something that's really important to me. I have published about interspecies justice and how it could advance planetary health. And it is a really, I think, a big challenge. I know some people in this group have I think, published a little bit on how to include multi-species voices in research. But yeah, I feel inspired by you in this moment, and I'm trying to think about how I can try to do that in this work, especially, yeah, given that I want to make sure I uplift that as a priority. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I just think about who better to guide us in governance than the rivers, right? Uh,
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
I will say I also have talked to several Indigenous people who I feel like offer a bit of that, lifting up the voice of the land as part of the research. And so I hope that there's some, and I do think that people that I've talked to generally are speaking about, thinking about nature on a more level, like as us, as part of, not separate from.
Awesome. And I've dropped in the chat there one of your recent publications, Kira, about advancing planetary health through interspecies justice. Encourage people to check that out. Why don't we move next to Pat? I'm always looking on the screen. Where did everybody go? Pat, do you want to share a little bit about your research project right now? What you're most got your head into, your hands, your heart into in your research world?
So I think the way that I started it is totally different from how Kira got into planetary health. For me, it was kind of like, so human health was mainly the main focus, and we were trying to see like what are the factors that are affecting the human in different parts. And when you are looking at like the human and you're trying to find like the biomarkers, the perfect signature is like what are the markers that you can combine together to be able to like for early diagnosis or to know who are the people who are at risk. Then at some point, so you're looking at proteomics, genomic, and at some point you see like that's not enough because it's kind of like two people might have some similar genetics, but at the same point, they are not having um, the same outcome or how it's like how they present with the disease or the symptoms. So then you start looking at other factors and see like, yes, there are like the environmental factors is important, the ethnicity is important, the lifestyle and diet is important. And then you start like adding more layers and layers to see like what are the factors. And when you are looking at like if I want to find a signature that actually shows the at-risk, this is not only like your personal one, it's like other things are also important, and how you are healthy or you are not healthy. And that's how it becomes like the human health is dependent on the health of like your environment, the health of everything that is around you. And so they should be healthy for you to be healthy, and you should be healthy for them to be healthy. And at the same time, they don't have the same definition of health. So it's like when you're talking about like how do you bring the voice of other species, it's actually a really good question for me, that how do you really define health from their perspective? Because when we are talking about water quality, we are normally talking about water quality from the human perspective. We never say like what is the water quality from the water's perspective or from the fish perspective. And I'm quite sure that the definition is going to be super different. And that's something that is kind of what is in my mind now. I'm trying to solve that how can we really define quality and health from the different factors around us, and how they are going to be different or even similar.
Oh, fantastic. So do you have some thoughts about how you might go about answering those questions?
So we just submitted the proposal like a month ago, and we are working on a new proposal. And we literally are trying to, by bringing people from different backgrounds and different disciplines, we are trying to say like, if so, different people, because they have different expertise, they might have a better understanding of what they are looking into. So if there are, for instance, soil experts, they might have a better understanding of the soil. And if you also bring like community or tribal nations, they can also have some voices and some definitions that could help us. So now what we are trying to do is kind of like bringing all of the voices and asking them to literally tell us, what do you think health from from different perspectives does really mean? And it's not only the health of the human, it's the health of everything. And by bringing all of those definitions to each other, we are trying to have like a better understanding of what it really means to be healthy.
Mm. Yeah, I really like the flip of the question for what does it mean for a river to be healthy as compared to what does it mean for humans to be drinking the water from the river to be healthy. That's really exciting. And best of luck with the grant applications. We are going to be talking about funding a little bit later in our session, so stay tuned for some discussion about that, Patricia. Why don't we go next to Kate? If you would like to share what is one of your favorite projects that you're working on right now, and yeah, just share a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really just love what I just heard too. So you get all these voices and competing storylines and ways to think about. And in my case, our question is, how do we live well now? And that's the ideas people have and the practices and the communities and relationships. And it's frankly what we're learning. So in the Partnership for Youth and Planetary Wellbeing, that is our process, Patricia, that you're speaking about. And it's young people who lead that process and invite their peers and their elders and their teachers and their communities into a dialogue about how to live well now. And we've just heard recently from the young Mapuche Weichi folk in the south of Chile that only the territory can answer that. How will the territory answer that for us? And the territory there meaning the birds, the sea, the creatures, and everyone. So they're listening now to the territory to come back to the table and answer it. So the Partnership for Youth and Planetary Wellbeing began probably about 15 years ago with the beginning of a project called the Wiki Moon School Project. It was funded by Global Affairs Canada, and it took place in the southern reaches of Chile, in the Chiloé archipelago. where I had the real privilege to work for a decade, and I'm still working with young people there. And in that project, we used um, taking the way of the community of virtual cycles of dialogue to use a co-creation methodology whereby young people first, before we made the school or designed the school or decided what got taught or how or by whom or where or when, they told us what they needed and what their answers were to all of those questions. And so the co-creation process, we trained these young folk up to be young anthropologists, which was their term for the word. And out they went into communities with their audio recorders and such, and did any number of pretty incredible interviews. They also did photo voice, and they've made photo books of late from the photographs that have come back as a teaching tool. In any case, so we entered into that discussion and process by analyzing those interviews and materials together in a co-analysis process to sort of diagnose what was still needed. And then we move into a dream phase where we dream what that might look like, then a design, then a development phase. And like when you put the word co in front of everything, we co-dream, co-design, co-develop, of course. And so after 2 or 3 years of that process, we started creating the school, literally gravel road up to a new space that was held by the elders, the Ouija Council of Chiefs, and began to create all of the different materials and content around the school. And it was that profound process whereby young people really came to the fore as leaders, co-leaders in the development of both research and practice, and then the school itself. That led us to the Partnership for Youth and Planetary Wellbeing. And I spoke a little bit about it, Heather, at the beginning, and this is the project we're doing now with those young folk and different ones, because now our young folk are getting to be older folk, so they bring new ones to the table. So we're in the south of Chile, in the Chiloé archipelago. We are in Costa Rica, Belize, and in the GTA in Canada, and also in Jamaica, working with the Maroon Youth. And we've just been lucky to get a small SSHRC grant to do some more work around the post-hurricane situation in Jamaica. But then what's the most important for these young people with whom we work is that they speak to each other. That's always been the wish and the will and the want, and that is so much easier to say than do. And so we're squirreled away finding all sorts of ways to make that happen. And we were really blessed with the SSHRC grant to all get together in Costa Rica. York University has an eco campus in Costa Rica called Las Nubes, which is the clouds, it means the clouds. And we, 36 of us, went to that space and place and spent 3 days together, sort of in a dream cycle, to think about what now to do in this partnership. What are we seeing in the co-analysis of all of this data? Partly that one paper, Heather, you mentioned, we're just starting to scratch the surface. And I've invited all of these young people to take part with me in our Dean's Lecture Series at York in the Faculty of Education. So they'll all be Zooming in. I think we are 16 on the call, much to the chagrin of my dean. But there will be in a panel talking about the young people themselves, saying about what they've learned about living well and what they want to share across places and spaces around living well. And therefore, what does that mean for their educational curriculum, the way they might design education and other spaces for planetary well-being?
That is really exciting, Kate. And I wonder is that just for York University's Faculty of Education? Is this something that the rest of of the Planetary Health Alliance could hear about. I think one of the things, certainly in the North American hub, that we've really tried to amplify, and it's great that Aman is here today, is he's one of our co-directors, one of our two youth co-directors for our new council. And we really want to support youth in whatever way we can. And part of that is connecting with each other, not feeling alone in this in the world right now with all of the things that are happening. So if it is a public event and you can provide any sort of information in the chat, that's amazing. And also just wondering if you are able to share any observations about some of those preliminary co-analyses about differences across spaces, and also similarities.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I will go digging when I stop talking and put the invitation to the Dean's lecture series in the chat. It's March 31st at 6 p.m. Just if you have space. And also, please, for people, reach out, particularly young people, because our partnership is not a closed circle. We're forever trying to open it up and find ways. We have youth advisory committees, we have youth ambassadors. There's always a space and place for young people to be at the table with the others. So it's a great question around the co-analysis. It's slow slogging, as you can well imagine. We do this in different countries and different places in different ways, in ways that culturally and historically make sense to the young people there. But as a general sharing, I think what we're seeing that is similar in terms of living well now. And then our secondary question is, what is the place of technology in that? And we're digging in there right now and writing a new grant, which I'll talk about in a minute, to really look at that. But how to live well now, we're sort of thinking about this as a term that I'm calling kindred ecologies. We're seeing that young people are making kin across and beyond and around and through all territories, sea, lands, people, species. And so what they're talking about really is an intergenerational, intercultural, interspecies kind of kin making would be what they would want to see in order to live well and to make spaces that are reciprocal and just. And they have an ethic of repair. So, for example, the Mapuche Liichi in the south of Chile are going back in one case to take an old colonial watermill that was implanted there by the Spanish colonial period, and they're reclaiming it. And they're using the entire process of going into and onto the land together with food and everything that's needed for a day-long kind of work, a neutron, to remake this space. So that would be one example of a practice that is a kindred ecology. It's different ages, different cultures on land, making these educative projects that really make people feel like they're living well while they're sort of reclaiming a colonial technology in this case.
Fantastic. I have two quick questions because I feel like we absolutely need to hear, especially for those of us who are older on the call. You mentioned youth advisories.
Yeah.
Could you just maybe give us your top 2 or 3 recommendations of how to support a youth advisory in a good way? What are some of the core principles of making sure it's not a tokenistic advisory, and how do we support youth in coming together? And the other question was just around age range. What does youth mean in your context?
Let me start with that question first, because for us, it's not biological. It's not just numbers of ages or age range. So we open the space for young people to self-define as young, and in different places that might mean you're 36 In other places, you could be 16. So our age range is quite wide, particularly in the south of Chile. When we started the school, we had many folk who said, you know, I missed my youth. I didn't get to go to school. So now I'm 40 and I'm going to be young and come to your school. And that's okay. So there's like a social definitional self-identification with being young. But in general, the young folk who come to work with us are between 13 and about 24, 25, but not always. And to ensure that, you know, this isn't a tokenism, I think the centrality of having young people in the governance model from the get-go. So co-development work, first of all, it's young people who want to be there. We always find honoraria. We find ways to show gratitude and value for all time that they spend. We also tend to find ways to provide certification if that's something that they value in relation to a resume or some kind of job search. So, you know, what the question is, well, what would you value? What makes sense for you to be here is an open question. And then we proceed to do it. The big trick, obviously, as we know, is to build that into your grant proposals. And I know SSHRC changes their mind about what we're able to call that thing from time to time, but the thing must be there, and it must be hefty, and it must be reasonable, and it must be culturally appropriate, you know, and for the right place and time. But I do believe the centrality of leadership being there to support what it is young people want um, to get and to learn from this, and what they can also give in the roles that make sense. Constant dialogue, constant co-creation of that.
Thank you so much, Kate. I think that key message is asking what would you value in terms of participation is so key and often so overlooked. We assume we know and we don't. So thank you so much for that, Kate. And let's move to you, Mae, to hear a little bit about your favorite research project right now, what you're working on, and yeah, just tell us all about it.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So I was going to start by saying, if you had asked me this 8 years ago, I would say I don't do research on planetary health. You know, my research is focused on human relationships with forests, water, climate change, and I do a lot of interdisciplinary work. So I work very closely with hydrologists and ecologists and climate scientists. And my role in that work has always been to really uplift community voices in science and in environmental management and policy and stewardship. Um, and, you know, so I was asking questions like, what does water mean to folks who live along the Mississippi River? Or, you know, how do forest dependent communities navigate impacts to forest health? Or how do farmers across the state of Minnesota deal with drought risk and adapt their conservation, you know, ag practices? But I have to say, like about 8 years ago, when I started working in service of and with tribal partners and indigenous community members, I learned that all of my research has to do with planetary health, you know, and that the decisions I make as a researcher and the relationships that I develop with community, it all is connected to the way in which we sort of acknowledge and celebrate and mourn relationships with the planet. The work that I think that I want to share about now is work that centers wild rice or Monoman piscine, Monoman in Ojibwe-Moan and piscine in Dakota. Wild rice that is naturally growing as a sacred gift and responsibility of the Ojibwe people and Anishinaabe peoples in this region. It's a very sensitive plant that grows in shallow lakes and streams. And Minnesota actually has some of the most the highest abundance of naturally growing wild rice in the world. And so it's very important economically, as a nutritious food source of protein. And it's also a medicine to the Anishinaabe and Ojibwe people. When 8 years ago, when we started to pull together a research group of scientists from the University of Minnesota to engage more in understanding the impacts to wild rice and why we've lost so much wild rice in the region. We were really interested in focusing on the impacts of sulfide on wild rice. So the source of that is predominantly mining operations in Minnesota, but we know there are other impacts related to changing land uses and hydrology, and also thinking, of course, about climate change. Um, and we knew to do this work, we needed to have partnership and support of tribal partners in the region. And so we went out to meet and build relationships with natural resource stewards, with different tribal agencies. We were told how to do this by folks in these communities, to talk to elders, to talk to rice chiefs, and to really listen and learn about the meaning and significance of this being wild rice, this relative to the tribes, to the indigenous communities there. And we were asked in our work to bring the spirit back to science, which at the time, the hydrologists and chemists and folks, we looked at each other and thought, this seems really big. This seems really important. And how do we do that? We had no idea how to bring the spirit back to science. And it was very daunting. And we had lots of rich conversations about it. And what we learned over time, over 8 years, and I continue to learn, is just how important it is um, to center natural relationships. And in the case for the Ojibwe folks that we worked with, Monoman is at the center of their relationship to the land and the water here in the state of Minnesota. Part of the Anishinaabe migration story from the East Coast to the Great Lakes was a prophecy to find the place where food grows on water. And being here in this region is a direct result of those relationships, and they're at risk. And folks, community members have told us that if they lose that Monoman, their relationship with the good berry, which is the English translation of Monoman, they're losing their cultural identity. And so it was a very humbling experience. We forged ahead with our research project, just focusing on, for the first year and a half, just meeting with people. We didn't take a sample of water. We didn't um, do any interviews or surveys with community members, but we went and met, and we were walked the land together, paddled the water together, really to understand why Monoman was at the center of the communities there and needed to be at the center of our work. And so our project was gifted an Ojibwe name, which is Kawe Geda Nanagata Wendam and Monoman, which means first we must consider Monoman. And that's something that simple phrase is something that has really guided all of the researchers and the research partnerships on this project throughout. And so we've all sort of done a lot of training, spend a lot of time together in community, so that we are ready to receive those gifts of knowledge that are given to us, and not only from our tribal partners, but directly from Monoman. And we've all kind of been on this journey, and I'm actually going to just share a couple of publications that kind of describe especially the first one, the journey that we went on together in this research to really protect wild rice, Monoman, piscine. As a scientist, I was asked to help protect stories and preserve stories that elders and young people have in terms of their relationships. So we conducted a series of interviews with knowledge holders, Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledge holders, many of whom are Monoman harvesters, about the gifts that Monoman shares with all of us and how we can learn from Monoman about things like climate change and impacts of colonization, but specifically land uses and forest fragmentation and how it comes down to affecting this plant relative. And I am just continuously reflecting on like the mysteries that are being opened up or revealed to me about my own relationship to the gnomon and also what that means for me as a researcher, and the excitement about where this relationship is going next. And actually, um, this past 2 weeks, there's legislation at the Senate in Minnesota to protect the rights of Monoman, the inherent rights of Monoman. And so a lot of folks have been testifying, and the original guidebook that I think was in the chat is something that one of our tribal members and holders and cultural advisors has said she's going to bring that guidebook and share it with each senator that she meets at the Capitol in St. Paul to hopefully bring the senators along with us on this journey to understanding just how important Monoman is and really how we first must consider Monoman wild rice in this journey. So it's kind of become this cultural keystone species, to use like ecologist terms, but it's really a central being and relationship and each set of teachings that continue to be revealed. That the more you engage with Monoman and Monoman stewards.
Well, thanks so much. I can really hear your passion for Monoman, Mae.
Yeah.
100%. What struck me is you touched on the very thing I was going to ask you about, and that was around it being a keystone or cultural keystone species, as an indicator for the
Mm-hmm.
health and well-being of the land, water, air, and other than human relations and human relations for that matter. And I was wondering if you could tease that out just a little bit more, around like what is it that that makes it that? What are
Yeah,
some of the ways in which it's an indicator for ill health or good health in the
right.
region?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it certainly has been held up to us as an indicator of healthy relationships with one another, not just with natural beings, but other than natural beings as well, with humans. I think to see and to experience communities who are so very much focused on a particular relative and the relationships around that relative. It certainly isn't species centric, like many Minnesotans are obsessed with red pine because it's a timber harvest, focused, uh, um, high value forest crop, really. Um, but when you focus on red pine, you're not managing for the full ecosystem. And when you focus on Monoman, and it requires caretaking. And the Ojibwe people and resource management staff that we've talked to have said that it depends on our being there to harvest. The more we harvest Monoman, the better it does, because you're actually reseeding when you're going out in the traditional ways and harvesting Monoman in a canoe and with uh, knocking sticks. You're reseeding that plant and the seeds. It's an annual, so it depends on being reseeded. It's not a perennial, which is unusual for shallow plants, wetland plants. Um, and that tight relationship that Ojibwe folks have with Monoman is really reciprocal, and it's a constant reminder to me as a researcher how important reciprocity is, and how important it is to like we have been asked by our tribal partners to give offerings when we asema or tobacco when we come to the water, because that's how important it is. Even though I'm a white woman with European ancestry, a settler, scientist, we bring tobacco and we make an offering. And one last little story to share is that one of my dearest friends and a cultural advisor to me um, uh, told me that she would be happy to be an advisor for this research project on Monoman and on protecting Monoman. And I said, all right, well, what is it that I have to do to start? I know, I need to go to my institutional review board process for doing interviews. Um, there are many steps to be culturally responsible, to work closely with tribal councils and their protocol for doing research. And she said, have you asked Monoman if Monoman wants to be a part of this study? And I hadn't, to be honest. And she shared with me how to do that and how to go to ceremony, and to get permission from Monoman to do this work as a starting point. So it's just this like really intentionality and respect and reciprocity that comes through that now is a part of everything I do in terms of thinking about research protocol is what am I giving back and how can I honor that process and the people and the beings that are there with me.
Thank you so much, May. Very much appreciate hearing from you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Angelica, to ask the next round of questions to our research panel. Over to you.
Yes, thank you all. I have so many other questions that I want to ask and like ideas, and I'm already thinking about how the work that Patricia is doing and the questions we already asked about how do you actually work through that process of biosensing more than human beings and understanding how that drives governance and policy and the work that Kira is doing. And I think that you just spoke to um, some of what that could look like, right, May, in the work that you're doing. So I'll stick to, the program here with my next question. And I think it's nice to follow what you were talking about in that returning, to the spirit of science, or returning spirit to science. And I think right now in our current world, our global landscape, everything that's going on, a big piece of that is how we ground in our intentionality in the research and the work that we're doing. So this question is more about why is the project that you are engaged with, or the work that you're sharing about, um, why is it so important? What is your why, or your learned why over the course of time in engaging with that work? And I will pass it to Patricia to start us off with this.
That's a really good question, but I think for me, the why is literally what everyone was discussing now. So we know some of the relations, we know like how some of the systems are working, but there are a lot of parts that we don't know. We don't know like what are the parts that we are missing and how knowing those things is going to affect our knowledge in a general way, because it's kind of like we are moving forward based on some assumptions and some of the things that we already have in hand. But it's totally possible that by adding more information and by realizing that the relations are not the way that we are thinking about it, the whole equation is going to be different, and we have to look at the problem from another point of view. So that's the why part for me. It's kind of like I am trying to, for me, this is like a puzzle, that I don't know what the whole puzzle looks like. So I have some pieces, I have a lot of missing pieces, and I'm trying to put all of these pieces together and I'm really curious to see what the end puzzle is looking like. And those puzzle pieces are the voices, are the relations, and are how everything is coming together. So this is really the why part for me, that I try to bring everyone, everything together. And as May was nicely explaining, that maybe by really asking other things and other species or other factors, the way that we relate to them is going to be different. So that is going to change our perspective on how to even look at the challenge or the problem from our own point of view. So that's my why.
Yeah, I really love that. And I'm curious too, maybe if you could speak to how that has probably changed since where you started to where you are now, and maybe it's going to change again as you get more insight from the work that you're doing.
Yes, so I like to complicate things for myself. So that's actually my superpower. So I'm trying to add more like layers and more complexity to everything. But what I now I'm kind of like organizing myself is, so you know things, you don't know other things. For the things that you don't know, there are three actually main reasons. One is like literally that doesn't exist. So the other people have looked into it, so it doesn't exist. So it's kind of like, okay, for now you can put a cap on it, don't really think about it. There are other things that there might be a link, but people have not been able to look into that because they don't have the tools or the means to do that kind of research. That's when I say, like, yay, we have biosensors. Either we have something to help the measurements or finding the relations, or we can find something or build something, a solution to be able to measure that. And the third part is, okay, there is nothing here. Probably I am the first one thinking about it. So I give a lot of credit to myself. And then I like, okay, let's start working on this part to see if it really exists. There is something here. It's worth working on it or not. And sometimes it leads to interesting results. Sometimes it's like, yeah, probably people knew better. That's why they never even like spend time in here. So that's my process for now.
I love that. I love the honesty too. And I can speak from us getting to know each other and working on some things that is true. Patricia adds many layers to the work itself. Um, let's see. Kate, would you like to share next?
Sure. I probably everybody on this call is into complexity, Patricia, and making things harder than perhaps they need to be, um, or not. So for me, the ground, the space, the heart, the intention of the work really is to meet the moment that young people are up against, which is a pretty profound moment of human rights crisis, generational injustice, and to think about how we can do something. There's already such great work going on in youth communities. So, how do we make space, amplify, share resources, share privilege, make intergenerational relations where that makes good sense, and just know what young people are up against, be with them, and to lean into these kinds of research projects that young people want to co-lead, to find answers that they still need to know, to embed some skills and leadership that they still want to learn. And I always learn. It's a mutual kind of learning. And it's opened up a space, I think, to come from that place of heart of being with young people to look at the social ecology, like the social political forces that are going on now, economic forces that young people are aware of, and to um, put themselves in relation to what these larger forces are, and to ask usually the $1 million questions, which is, how do these two things matter? Um, how were they in this space between the human and the more than human, the digital, all these different worlds that have been created around them? And together look for both answers, but also the questions that they next need to answer and find out. And really, it's about making space.
Yeah, I love and so appreciate the work that you're doing. And it sounds like, for you, your why is really driven by trying to understand their why, right? The youth's why. And I think for our youth, many of them have never lived in a world that wasn't complex trauma after trauma, and now we have technology and information overload and exposure to all of that, which the individual human is not designed to process and to regulate and experience. So I'm curious, just in your journey, how you've navigated while trying to understand their why, which for them it's because the world is what it is. It's crazy. How do you help them stay grounded in being able to engage with the work without getting so overwhelmed? Because that can be really, really difficult, I think, for any of
That's
us.
a great question. And I would again say that's a mutual kind of space that we found for grounding. I'll give you one example. We have a climate leadership program. It's called Rooted and Rising, that is co-developed with young people and about 6 different youth serving NGOs. And it happens in the Toronto area, in the GTA. And we now have York University to certify it, which is wonderful. It's not really what the young people care that much about, although it's nice if it's got a university certification. It doesn't hurt them for sure. And we wrote the curriculum together, listening to say what is needed first. Well, we'll have to do all of the self-care, the self-work, the relationship building. Let's do that first. And then we can even have the ground to stand on when we're going to look at the causes, the problems, the extent of the problems, the techno-scientific climate science. But first we have to do this other work. So that's one example of how we were able to do that and to really lean into what they were asking. And it wasn't simply, quote unquote, like climate anxiety, but it was a way of just holding a space for them to come together to talk about what this felt like and how they felt alone. Some of them not, others had connections and community, and they opened the doors to that community. But all of that work went on before we even began talking about, climate change or climate science.
Yeah, thank you for that. May, would you like to share a little bit about your why?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I talked a little bit about my why already. Uh, well, I think about I th I guess for me, I think a lot about the kind of uh the need for healing, and that the work that we're doing, and our partners who have experienced so much in terms of, intergenerational trauma, racism, um, neglect and harm that's just unimaginable for a culture to experience and to get through. And I think about that sort of this culture of healing is so ingrained in the communities that we've been working with, and sort of acknowledging um, that there's a path forward, and that we're all sort of in this together. And our scientists at the University of Minnesota and working tribal partners on this project, we've made mistakes, and um, what I appreciate is that that we're always held accountable and that we're always invited into these spaces as long as we do so, with a good heart, and in a good way. And so that patience and I think welcoming that our tribal partners and now friends have provided for us has just been really inspiring, and I think it's something that I bring to the work, and this work can be so hard and emotionally um just taxing, and I see, our Indigenous community members, youth and elders, coming together for drum ceremonies, or doing a circle dance, and talking about the stories of wild rice, of maple sugar, of walleye, oga, and there's just so much, I think, just respect and I think a sense of healing, every day, that every day you can heal and learn, and that there's this a sense of, I think, curiosity for me about understanding that um the psychology of that, the sociology of that, um and a real interest in being near that kind of energy and resilience and passion and um spirituality. And I was thinking about stories that we hear about Monoman is really suffering right now. Wild Rice is really suffering because of we haven't been good relatives to Monoman. And some of our tribal partners have told me in interviews that I think that's supposed to happen. I think that it's supposed to happen because we need to relearn who Monoman is, and we need to establish new relationships with Monoman. It's taking a break right now. Monoman is, and that's on purpose so that we can learn to do the work that we have to do, so that we get to be with Monoman again, and so that we don't take it for granted. And it's those kinds of, and those aren't just anecdotes, right? Those are central cultural stories of healing, of resilience, of reciprocity, that come through in every interaction I have with community members there. And it's just so damn inspiring, and it it helps me get through the day to day of life, and it also really motivates me and energizes me as a scientist.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to exactly what you kind of started with, which is that these cultures of healing have the energetic, psychological, sociological power to change us, and
Mhm.
change the way we engage with one another and the land, and just our ways of being. So, thank you for that. I will pass it to Kira, to hear your response.
Thank you. Such good answers, and I really just love hearing about how how we shape our research and are shaped by our research. Yeah. I guess I was trying to figure out where to start with this, and I think there's a bit of it that I think growing up, uh, my family was economically very poor, and I grew up outside like most of the time. And during that time, I remember really finding that like a foundational, just sort of perspective that, and worldview that all species and ecosystems are deserving of thriving and doing really well. And then, of course, as I grew up, I kind of realized that was not really how things were working out for many other species. Became really aware of our food systems and just how problematic the industrialization of food has been, and how so many other species have taken on the burden of human development and advancement in a number of ways. And at the same time, that human communities were being disadvantaged by all these processes. I started to think about it through a lens of conservation. I did my master's degree in conservation biology and thought a lot about protected areas and like the ways that we perceive nature and the ways that we perceive our interconnectedness with or separation from nature, how humans should be or shouldn't be involved with nature, and that's and promoting nature's well-being. And then I started getting into thinking about complex adaptive systems and systems thinking and really getting into this idea, kind of coming back to food systems and thinking about how, we have this really it's a complex system where we have, policies and global governments and local governments and all and communities who have food needs and people who need to have foods on their plates and healthy food and traditional food. And when we put it all together, it's really, really, it's not, there are no straight lines. There's nothing that is going to, or any intervention that you make is going to have ripple effects through a lot of different spaces. And so in thinking about that, and my arrival at Planetary Health, I felt like Planetary Health started to make a lot of sense to me because I was like, yes, here's where like we bring all of these things together and we really acknowledge that all of this is very, very connected. And then I think I've perpetually been drawn to governance because in so many ways, the ways that I feel are the societies that have the most power in our current world are really creating a lot of harm. And so I want to think through how to change that. And if we want to change our collective behavior and we want to change the way that our systems work, then I think we need to think about how our governments, how our key institutions, how our civil and community groups, how all of these institutions work together and how they can better shape the world that we live in to move again towards collective well-being instead of only elevating certain human populations. And so I feel like that's the why. I feel like sometimes I know I feel like I've heard the like criticism of like I can't work on everything at the same time but I feel like in my like I've never been able to pull these things apart from each other, but I was like, how can you work on just one thing? Like you can't, like you're really like there's so many other things that are involved. Like how are you not including, and when I get those responses, I often really just think back to that of like I like seeing these interconnected ties. And really then I hope in thinking about planetary health governance, I found this research gap, but then like wanting to be able to think about advancing governance, to like think about this more eco-social well-being. I feel like I couldn't even begin to take a step down that road without really understanding what was important to it and how to like really think through these things. And I hope that in the future I'll be able to think more about like what are the kind of points that we can really pull on to influence system change and transformations in society. So yeah, I think that's my why.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just love your passion and authenticity with how it's evolved over the course of your journey. And I really hope you figure this out for the greater good of the world. So I'm looking forward to following along with your work as you continue forward. For the sake of time, I will pass it to Heather for our last question, so that way we have a little bit of space at the back end for dialogue.
Thanks, Angelica, and thanks to our panelists for bringing your excitement and love for what you do to this conversation, and why you do it. The last question comes about funding. And it's like, how are you finding the funding landscape for planetary health research? And the reason I really wanted to ask all of you this question is that we've heard a lot today about the importance of Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous leadership in the space of planetary health research. And I'm very familiar with the Canadian funding landscape, not at all familiar with the American landscape. But we don't have a funding agency for planetary health in Canada. We have siloed health institutes for funding, but we don't have one that is all-encompassing of environment and health together and the interconnectedness. And so I'm interested in hearing, especially if you are non-Indigenous and wanting to engage in planetary health work, um, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in putting in funding applications, if you're non-Indigenous, and how does that relate to what funding agency you might go to? And are you struggling with the peer review process when you're submitting applications for grants? If you have some thoughts on that. And maybe to the flip side, also at the other end, where it comes to knowledge mobilization, if you're encountering any challenges yet in the planetary health sphere. My sense is not as much there, but maybe more on the funding side. And so if people have some thoughts about that, I'd love to hear them. But also wanted to recognize that those who have been able to stay on to the webinar through to this point might also want to have a chance to ask you questions, comments, and ideas about future research. So maybe just think about keeping your answers relatively brief on that front, but really keen to hear what you all have to say. And could we start with you, Kate?
Yeah, sure. And very briefly, in Canada, there's never enough money, of course, and it's a grueling process to land any of it. Um, Obviously, in relation to working alongside and with Indigenous communities, the process has to be one of meaningful co-development of all the stages of the research, and I've been pleased enough to be part of that process before. Mostly, I go to SHRC, Social Science Humanities Research Council, and that's tricky because the word health is in planetary health, and I tend to use the word well-being and sort of mean it as a much, holistic sort of space. But yeah, it's a tricky landscape for all the reasons that you say, Heather. I won't say very much more. I mean, I've been pretty lucky, but I have to really go to odd places to find little pots of money.
Okay, thanks, Kate. How about you, Mae?
Yes, tricky. I'll echo that. In the United States, gosh, we've had projects pulled off the projects that are recommended haven't been funded. Projects that have been funded have been removed from funding because they have certain words in them like climate change or environmental justice or equity work. And so it is really bleak here right now for federal funding. So many people have been forced out of their positions in federal agencies, and so review times for proposals and even just calls themselves have just really declined. I'm part of a long-term ecological research project here in the Twin Cities that's funded by the National Science Foundation. And we were told that though since the program started, you could renew every year. It's a 5-year, 6-year grant. You renew every year. That there's no renewal this year for our project, and so we're having to pivot and look for funding from other places. So foundations have been, I think, a source of maybe better funding for this kind of work. We also are lucky in the state of Minnesota. We have funding that has been legislated through lottery dollars that the state brings in for this kind of research. And also the citizens of the state chose to tax themselves so that we have what are called legacy funds that go to things like planetary health kinds of issues. So it's really a state by state kind of basis. And I know other states aren't faring as well as Minnesota is in terms of doing this kind of research and being able to fund it and invest in students and to support tribal nations in the work as well.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, just because I'm really quite ignorant about the funding landscape in the U.S. in general, but knowing what's happening politically, we certainly hear about it up north. Thanks. Kira, any thoughts from you?
Just, I suppose, so I'm a US citizen and I'm in Canada studying at a Canadian institution. And when I started, there was no Tri-Council, like no CIHR, any of the Canadian institutions at the time when I started my PhD. They did not fund any international students. And that has changed since, I think. But even despite that, I would say that the funding landscape does typically seem to be really very siloed, as you said. And I have perpetually been kind of turned down because I'm crossing between different areas and sometimes multiple different areas. And they're just like, no, because you're not doing specifically just this one thing, we aren't going to fund you. So it's been definitely really challenging.
Yeah, it seems like we hear a lot about the need for interdisciplinarity, but not the need to fund it. It's a real conundrum, certainly. How about yourself, Pat? Any thoughts on the funding landscape for planetary health?
I can actually say like I feel it the most because I moved from Belgium to here 2 years ago, and in Europe there are a lot of opportunities. So I totally feel like I wasn't appreciating the options that there were there. And here I have to really look for the calls. And as everyone said, it's really challenging. But yeah, it's totally, you can feel the difference.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I don't know much about Horizon Europe, but it's showing up in my inbox lately and it seems daunting.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you open for this year, it's mainly about like they are putting a lot of effort on exosomic climate and how it affects like human like planet. They have everything in the calls.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much, panelists. This has been such a wonderful hour and a half together. We have a little bit of time left, and maybe we could just open up to our few remaining uh, folks who are listening in, Michelle and Eric. If either of you have questions that you wanted to ask the panelists, and maybe you could just introduce yourself before, um, if you have anything that you'd like to say, but no pressure if you don't. And there might be some cross questions too amongst our panelists. So I'll just, yeah, just open the floor if anybody has anything they wanted to ask our panelists. You are most welcome, Michelle. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll mention one thing that I find it interesting that this whole planetary health thing, I'm sort of coming to this more recently, like I guess, involved with forests and watersheds and ecology and that kind of stuff. But it just seems that, everybody's chasing the money and it's about the money and fiscal conservatives talk about you got to be saving money. Well, it just seems that planetary health and human health is just, these are, by investing in both of them, it's a huge cost saving drive across the board, everything, and every turn, everywhere you look. And if we were investing, even a few, well, I mean, it is like OPEC is going to be, say there's going to be $14 trillion of new oil and gas investment in the world before things started kicking off now. But just it's going to cost us billions and trillions to try to try to restore these ecosystems against that, say, $14 trillion of new investment. But it still seems our cheapest investment is to restore these ecosystems. It's still going to cost millions and billions, but it's an ounce of prevention is creating a pound of cure. So we have these ecosystems that do all these ecological goods and services for free, and that little bit of investment in that will just have such huge planetary health and human health possibilities that are cost savings in of themselves. And I'm just so wondering just how we can make those kind of connections, that just by restoring ecosystems and looking after the planet, and those the ecosystems will then improve human health, which then won't cost so much in the healthcare end of things. And that's kind of the messaging I'm trying to figure out, because I'm just maybe going to be working on a paper about planetary health and bringing the forest and watershed angle to it, but just trying to see what is the hook, what is the message that we can get this through, the flat earthers kind of thing. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah, this is part of the portfolio of this council is on the policy advocacy side of things, because this is really what we're talking about is political will, and the ways in which the lobbyists for industrialized extractivism continue to influence decision making rather than the wisdom of indigenous peoples, of the medical profession around how prevention is way less financially burdensome than it is to try to deal with treatment and cure, if you will. So, yeah, that is it. It is such an important question. That
And like the cost of like all the, the
yeah,
problem, like the LA fires, they say the cost of that's going to be 160 billion US, right?
yeah,
And we can't keep afford to keep paying for rebuilding back the same way, or trying to recover from those kind of big storms too. So I mean, that just doesn't make any fiscal sense either. And that's kind of my big question, is that
yeah.
the insurance companies aren't going to keep paying for we're rebuilding after all the big storms keep whipping through. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a quandary.
I wonder about the insurance companies and their pull in political spaces, right? Where it's like, yes, there's been insurance, payouts to an extent, but the more that we see the climate disasters, the more we're going to see either further inequities, further injustice, which we will see. I know that, but also maybe that will be some of the political push to change. What are other people's thoughts? I don't want to dominate here. I think I will just say I think Kira's work around governance is going to be a really important contribution, and that we really do need to look at transformative um, changes to governance. It can't just be, a little bit of fix here and there. It's got to be a major change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kira.
So just to add, Eric, I put an article in the chat. I know Margot Parks is working a lot on like the watersheds thinking, and that is like a jurisdictional sort of frame in planetary health. So maybe just some things to check out. And I know that within the insurance space, that the reinsurance companies that insure the insurance companies have been talking a lot about this kind of stuff for a while, of really worrying about climate change, and perhaps, and there's been a lot of talk about things being less insurable because of it. And I know people who can't get their properties insured for fire and fire prone areas and that kind of thing already. So I think that that's playing out. Yeah, and I hope that I can offer some contribution to advancing this in this governance way of thinking. Yeah.
Right. There's Kettle is a company, a reinsurance company in California then, that is trying to figure out the causes of the wildfires that they've been seeing for the last 10, 15 years in there too, because they're trying to help figure out what those solutions are. But in a lot of cases, it's where, the extractive industries on one hand are doing their magic and it makes sense in their world and they can keep on doing their industries. But then on the other hand, then we have all the planetary health and the storms and disasters and the rebuilding and etc. So one hand doesn't know what the other eight hands are doing. And then it makes sense with one hand doing this, but the other hand, we're paying through the nose, those repairs or the costs of rebuilding. So that huge disconnect from that is and it is important, and that Kettle company is, I think, leading the charge, where lots of the insurers are just saying that we're not going to start covering this kind of stuff, which will put pressure on governments and the extractive industries who, lots of times the industries have the governments as their captives. Essentially, they run that industry. So it's going to put pressure on them, which helps us make the case. But it's still, governance is just such a huge thing that just, and basically unblinking belief in the status quo.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, really important conversation to continue having. And something came to mind. If you're not familiar, Eric, with some of the well-being economy frameworks and models that have been very successful in Europe, that might be something of value to look at for your paper, and how some of that work has led to the way the nation actually incentivizes, what they reward economically based on changing the metrics of how we are measuring quality and measuring growth, and even economic growth.
Yeah,
So,
and there's a drive in Canada here too to what do they call it now? It's called Natural Assets Initiative, where they are trying to go out and value the ecological goods and services that are being produced by these ecosystems and have them in the bottom line, and accounting for municipalities and that kind of stuff, saying that these are natural assets and there is a value to them that then is adding to the bottom line and not subtracting from. So there's some initiatives I know in and around that, and they're working with the Canadian, I guess, Accounting Policy Board of Canada or something. They're trying to see that can they get those into the financial statements of municipalities where 50% of the greenhouse gases are emitted at the municipal level. So yeah, there's opportunities and places to learn from other places and other jurisdictions, and from First Nations and from the ecosystems themselves. There's lots of learning we can do.
yes, absolutely. Well, I am going to thank all of you for joining in today. I am leaving feeling much more inspired, and I'm eager to get outside into this 2 feet of snow and talk to it, see what it has to tell me or share with me as to why it's continuing to come down here in Minnesota. But truly, the work that you're all doing is incredible, and we're excited to stay, partners and help to uplift the work that you're doing in any way that we can as this hub continues to evolve and emerge and grow. So we'll get this recording out to the network of the region, which is a larger group of members within the population, and I hope you exchange your contacts with each other so that you can remain connected on future collaborations. And again, just thank you again, and I hope you all have a very peaceful evening.
Likewise, I thank all of you, our panelists, and our audience for coming. It's always exciting to hear what other people are doing and spend time just listening, and likewise feeling inspired. I just wanted to make a note that our next open session for our hub will be on education, planetary health education in April. I don't think we have a date firm yet for that. We'll also be doing one on philanthropy. We have a new philanthropy director for our council, which is really good because we need funds to support this work. We're all doing it on a volunteer basis. And then in June, we're going to do something on a more global scale to connect with the other regional hubs of the Planetary Health Alliance. So with that, we wish you well and have a wonderful day, and carry on with the good work that you do. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.